Hello, dear ones. Welcome to the Dream Lab, a safe, inspiring place for you and God to dream without limits what you most desire to be, do, and have in your life right now. Every episode, I hold space for you to be irreplaceably you, to explore your unique design and discover your dreams as a reflection of God's heart for the world around you. I am your host, your guide, your encourager-in-chief, Christina B. Come on in to the Dream Lab. Hello, my lovelies. Welcome back to another episode of the Dream Lab podcast. I'm your host, Christina B. And this week we are diving into a really deep and meaty subject that I wish I had discovered 8 years ago. It would have helped me so much. So the reason why I'm starting with this is I just want to pass along every ounce of information that I can that has helped me so that it can help you too. Before we do that, I would love to invite you to go back and listen to the first 2 episodes of the Dream Lab podcast, because that's where I explain what the Dream Lab is and where it originated. I tell its origin story, its genesis story, if you will. It's a very sweet story, so I invite you to go back and check out those first 2 episodes. And now, without further ado, we are diving into the topic of your central nervous system and chronic stress and how those 2 things can dramatically affect your ability to dream. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about what you can do about it. At the end of the podcast, I'm going to share some additional resources where you can go for more information. Okay, so in this episode, we're going to talk about the central nervous system and what it is made up of. We're also going to talk about survival mode and chronic stress and what symptoms that you can look for in your own life to determine if you are in a state of a dysregulated central nervous system. And we're going to talk a little bit about fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Some of you may not have heard about the fawn, but yes, fight, flight, freeze, and then fawn is another one. Okay, if you are driving, I would suggest hitting the pause button so that you can come back to this episode later. But if you're somewhere where it won't endanger you, close your eyes for a second and just envision the dashboard of your car and all of its lights and all of its symbols. And most of those, you probably know what they mean. And if you don't know what they mean, then you have your owner's manual to go to and look up the symbol that you don't understand. So if the check engine light comes on, or the battery light, or the little oil can, you can also go to the owner's manual to explain anything else that you might want to know about your car, like how to set up your entertainment and what the warranty is and all that kind of stuff. And for a moment, close your eyes and imagine your smartphone and all of the little symbols and icons, like for the apps and things. The little music symbol, it's where you access your music. The little bubble, which is the text messages. So you probably have an idea of what all of those mean by just looking at the symbol. But where do we go for information about our central nervous system? If our central nervous system had like warning lights, like our car's dashboard, what are those? And what can we do about them? Like for the podcast this week, specifically, I just want to dive in on a 30,000 foot level what the central nervous system is. So what does it do to keep our heart beating and our food digesting? What safety mechanisms exist to keep us alive at all costs? What fuel does the central nervous system and brain need to thrive? And what are the warning signs that you need to pay attention to indicating that something might be going awry? The central nervous system combines information from the entire body to directly or indirectly affect activity across the entire body. This includes thought, movement, emotion, and including breathing, heart rate, hormones, all of that. So I'm going to get a little technical here, but just stay with me because I think I can explain it in a way that's easy to understand. So the nervous system is comprised of the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which is everything else out into your body. So think of all the little nerves that branch out from your spine into the various organs and systems and other areas of your body, like your arms, your legs, your torso, your hands and your feet. The central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord, has the autonomic nervous system, which communicates with internal organs and glands. It has 2 branches of that, sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic is very arousing. It's the You hear a noise outside and suddenly you're very alert. The parasympathetic is very calming. It's when you are at home, maybe you're relaxing with your family, eating a nice dinner, and you're very calm. The peripheral nervous system is also called the somatic nervous system, and soma just means body. So it just means the nervous system that exists inside your body, and it communicates with sense organs and muscles and things like that. So there's sensory, which is sensory input. And then there's motor, which is motor output. Hope that part makes sense. So input and output, sensory versus motor. 80% of the signals between the brain and the body travel from the body to the brain, meaning they are sensory. So you experience the world around you through your 5 senses. So most of the information traveling throughout your body travels from your body to your brain and not the other direction. Hope this is going to make more sense later. It would help if there were visuals, which I do have in the Dream Lab Module 1, but we don't have the benefit of that. So just stick with me here for a second. 80% of the signals between the brain and the body travel from the body to the brain, and that happens primarily through the vagus nerve. So if we were to do a little practice exercise right now, we can just tap into what this might feel like by asking your body, what is your body, what are you trying to communicate with me right now? Again, if you're driving, please hit the pause button and come back to this later. But if you're in a place where you can close your eyes and take some deep breaths, let's do this little exercise. So I want you to close your eyes and just take a really deep breath in. And exhale slowly through your nose. Take one more deep breath in. And then exhale slowly through your nose. Again, ask yourself, what is my body trying to tell me? So just start at the top of your head and scan down through your body. Do you have a relaxed jaw? Or is there some tension in your jaw? What about your neck muscles? Are your neck muscles relaxed, or do you have some tension there? Are you breathing shallowly, or are you breathing deeply? Tune in right now to your shoulders. Are your shoulders rounded and hunched forward? Do you have pain anywhere? If so, what does that feel like? All of the senses and surroundings of your body allow you to just tap into your body and what your body might be trying to communicate with you right now. Gives you a moment of awareness and anchoring yourself into the present moment. Okay, so I mentioned a few minutes ago that the autonomic nervous system has 2 branches, sympathetic and parasympathetic. The sympathetic part is the fight, flight, or freeze. The parasympathetic is also called rest and digest, or feed and breed. And the truth is, both of these are brilliant. We need them both. But where we as human beings get into some challenges is we tend to live in the fight, flight, freeze more often than we should. And we'll unpack that a little bit more in just a minute. So the sympathetic nervous system is fight, flight, or freeze. It increases your heart rate. Just imagine, like if a tiger came barreling into your living room right now, you would be prepared to, and your brain would make these calculations instantaneously. So it would prepare you to either fight the tiger or run. Or if you felt like you couldn't do either of those and your best chance was to freeze or play dead, basically to allow the tiger to get bored and go elsewhere, your body would do all of this and calculate all of these things instantaneously. So the sympathetic side of your nervous system, fight, flight, freeze, it increases heart rate, respiratory rate, blood pressure, and it dilates your pupils. And it decreases digestion and urine production, reproduction, all of those things, because those aren't necessary when you're prepared to fight the tiger. The parasympathetic nervous system, also called rest and digest, that increases your digestion and it decreases your heart rate, respiratory rate, blood pressure, and pupil dilation. Your brain is an exquisite supercomputer. It can experience up to 70 thoughts per day. Every thought produces a corresponding biochemical reaction, which we experience as an emotion typically. Every thought produces a corresponding biochemistry in your body, which you can experience as an emotion. The brain has virtually unlimited storage capacity. It has like 100 billion neurons branching out into 100 trillion trigger points forming what experts call a neuron forest. So inside your brain looks like a massive forest, this really big tree with tons of branches. Dr. Caroline Leaf, in her book, Who Switched Off My Brain, explains what all of these trees and branches looks like in your brain. And that's actually where the Dream Lab podcast logo came from. Because if you look at the top of the tree, it has all of those branches and leaves, and then it travels down through the body of the trunk of the tree and out into the body like the peripheral nervous system does. So that's why the Dream Lab podcast logo looks the way that it does. Okay, back to our brains. Our brains are constantly changing, which means they're neuroplastic. That's just a fancy word to say that we can change our brains. Brain information travels at up to 268 miles per hour. That is mind-blowing. The spinal cord is the main source of communication between the body and the brain. The brain can generate enough electricity to power a light bulb. Also mind-blowing to me. Oh my stars, that our brains can power a light bulb? That's remarkable. And our brains have 100,000 miles of blood vessels. And for comparison, that is 24,900 miles around the equator. Wow. Holy moly, that's a lot. Our brains are amazing. Just exquisite is the word that I used here. Okay, what is survival mode and chronic stress? So our brains have two parts. Upper brain puts us into calm. This is a part of our brain that we use when we are planning and deciding. It's the part of our brains that can solve problems, collaborate with other people, and make choices. The lower brain is kind of like a thunderstorm. It reacts, it defends, it attacks, it runs, and it freezes. So again, the two parts of our brain, the upper brain and the lower brain, are kind of like the rest and digest and the fight flight. So when we are in survival mode, when we're in fight, flight, freeze pretty unrelentingly, like when hard things are going on in our lives and we have stressful jobs, stressful financial situations. Maybe we have an aging parent that we're caring for or a sick child. When our brains go into survival mode, the learning and thinking brain kind of goes offline, and it's hard to access and operate from that part of our brain when we're in a state of chronic stress. And then the limbic system, or the lower brain, is what takes over from there. So basically, an external stimuli, whether that's the tiger that we talked about, or your angry boss, or this chronic unrelenting situation in your life that's really stressful, sounds an alarm, triggers some stress hormones, and then that triggers body-wide changes, including what we talked about earlier, like the heart rate and the digestion and things like that. The only trouble is we were not designed to live in that chronic state of stress for long periods of time. So in the wild, animals, you'll notice, if you just go watch any African safari video where a tiger or a lion has attempted to attack like a gazelle, that gazelle will instantly like fight, flight, freeze, basically. The freeze for a gazelle in the wild is kind of like playing dead, almost like possum. And there's actual video of this. It's remarkable. Normally, if the threat passes and everything is okay, like the tiger runs into your living room and you mount a defense either to fight, to flee, or to freeze, once that threat is over, the body returns to a state of normalcy. However, in today's world, we are living in a constant state of stress, and this takes a toll on our bodies and our central nervous systems. So when our bodies don't go back into a parasympathetic state after the threat has passed, this is what is known as chronic stress. This is so important and such a topic of vast discussion right now that there was an entire issue of National Geographic magazine dedicated to chronic stress and the science of stress, what it does to your body, what it does to your brain. So in the National Geographic magazine article, it talks about what chronic stress does to the brain, and that includes shrinking the brain. Like your brain on chronic stress will actually shrink. And when your brain senses stress, it releases hormones that cause the heart to beat faster, breath rate to quicken, and senses to become sharper. The prefrontal cortex, which is the upper brain that I talked about a little while ago, which regulates emotions, is less active when someone is experiencing high levels of stress. So when someone is in a chronic state of stress, they become really overreactive emotionally. Little things become big things. And you probably have an example of this in your own life. So unrelenting chronic stress can lead to a dysregulated central nervous system. What are the symptoms of a dysregulated central nervous system? First of all, mood swings, frequent shifts between irritability, anger, and sadness. Oh my stars, I cannot even describe to you how irritable I would feel when the traffic light turned red. When I was in like my most stressful state, I would get so irritated just for having to sit at a traffic light. Oh my God. So that is such a stressful and awful way to live. Anyway, some additional symptoms of a dysregulated central nervous system: heightened anxiety, feeling overwhelmed or on edge, even in non-threatening situations. The littlest things can overwhelm you, like having to go to the grocery store. You have trouble sleeping. You either have trouble falling asleep or staying asleep, and you wake up feeling unrested. Tummy troubles is another symptom of a dysregulated central nervous system, whether that be chronic constipation, chronic diarrhea, or alternating between the two. Irritable bowel syndrome, food sensitivities. Sensory overload is another symptom of a dysregulated central nervous system. Overreaction to sounds, lights, textures, crowded environments. Like, do you get stressed out when you're in crowds? Persistent fatigue, feeling drained or exhausted even with adequate rest. Meltdowns or shutdowns, frequent emotional outbursts or withdrawal from feeling too much stress. A dysregulated central nervous system can make us feel disconnected from our bodies because it disrupts the normal processing of sensory information and can cause imbalances in the body's response to stimuli, often manifesting as feelings of numbness, detachment. So what does that look like? So if you have a disconnect between your mind and your body, here's what that might appear as in your life. Not being able to recognize normal hunger and thirst cues. This can lead to irritability, hangry anybody, headache, cravings, that sort of stuff. Continuing to eat beyond the normal fullness cues until the stomach is bloated. A disconnect between the mind and body could look like pushing through strenuous exercise despite feeling deep fatigue and sleep deprivation. Unable to discern your body in space, which is proprioception. And this can lead to accidents, injuries, trips, falls. That could be as simple as lacking some depth perception. If there's a disconnect between your mind and your body, you're not aware of where you are in space. You might get too close to something, bump into it, get too close to the flame on your stove. Forgetfulness, inability to calm, insomnia, always in your head trying to figure it out. Ooh, that's a big one for me. Here are some additional symptoms of the mind-body disconnect. Feeling disconnected from yourself, your emotions, and the people around you. Inability to cope with stress of any kind, like me sitting at the traffic light feeling irritated. Severe stress or problems in relationships, work, finances, or health. Mental issues such as depression, which is living in the past. Anxiety, you're worried about the future. Dread. Oh, this is a big one. Dread, this impending feeling of doom, like something awful is going to happen. Disproportionate reactions to situations, circumstances, or conversations. Okay, now let's dive in a little bit deeper to fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Okay, we talked about the 3 levels of the central nervous system, the rest and digest, or the feed and breed. That's the good part. That's where you want to be most of the time. We also talked about fight, flight, and freeze, shut down, and then we're going to talk about fawn. A lot of people don't know about fawn. It's something that I just discovered in the past 12 to 18 months when I started learning about these things. Okay, number 1, rest and digest or feed and breed. This is where you feel joy. This is where you would say, oh, I just feel like myself. I can be in the present moment with the people around me in my normal surroundings. I feel grounded. I'm curious and open. I'm open to meeting new people. I'm open to new experiences. I can feel compassion for other people. I am connected to the people around me, like my family and my friends, and I'm oriented to my environment. So the physical symptoms that you would experience when you're in a state of rest and digest is you have increased digestion, you have proper intestinal motility, your immune system operates the way it should. In other words, you don't get colds and flus frequently. You can rest and recuperate. When you go to sleep at night, you get deep sleep and you wake up in the morning feeling refreshed. Your circulation is great. rate, and you have oxytocin, which is that love hormone that a lot of doctors talk about. And you have the ability to relate and connect to people and situations around you. You have a decreased defensive response. So that is rest and digest. Next, let's look at fight flight. So that's one coin with two sides, okay? The fight side, you would experience symptoms or emotions of rage, anger, irritation, and frustration. Fight can mean literally fighting off an attacker or simply arguing, like you're prone to start an argument or disagree. Flight can make me run away from danger or running away from problems. Physical symptoms of fight flight: increased blood pressure, heart rate, adrenaline. Sometimes you can even feel the adrenaline in your body. It almost feels like you drank a ton of caffeine. Fight flight is also noted to have decreased fuel storage, insulin activity, digestion, salivation, relational ability, and immune response. Okay, so we just talked about the fight side of fight flight. Now let's look at the flight side of that coin. Flight means panic, fear, anxiety, worry, and concern. Flight can mean running away from imminent danger or running away from life's problems. Now we're going to talk about freeze and shut down. This is where your body just collapses. Like you've got nothing left in you. You literally sometimes feel like you can't move. You feel numb. You could feel depression, helplessness, and hopelessness. This is where your body literally goes into the conservation of energy at all costs. You can sometimes feel shame or you can feel trapped. I know in the few years after my mom died and when I recognized that I was stuck in grief and that my mom's death had triggered something it wasn't just a sad event. It was something that I was really struggling with on a level that I couldn't explain. There were days when I literally didn't get out of my pajamas because I couldn't. I physically had nothing in me to go through a day and I would just sleep. My body was just so profoundly fatigued that I would just walk from my bedroom to the couch and fall asleep again. I would get a drink or, maybe make a bite of food and then I would fall asleep again. So the behavior patterns of the freeze or shutdown could look like spending hours watching TV or YouTube videos or incessant scrolling on your phone. Freeze and shutdown could look like undereating or overeating, overusing technology, getting confused or disoriented under stress, fixating on something to the exclusion of other things, excessive sleeping, addictions of any kind like porn, shopping, food, alcohol, drugs, workaholism, self-harm. And the freeze and shutdown response could look like withdrawing from your normal circles of friends and family and having absolutely no interest in normal activities. Okay, that was the freeze and shutdown. And now we're going to talk about Fawn. This is something I didn't know existed. So what does Fawn look like? That means over agreement. You are trying to be overly helpful. Your primary concern is with making someone else happy or people pleasing. Yes, people pleasing. Overdependence on the opinions of others, easily controlled or manipulated, and little to no boundaries. The Fawn response can often happen in people who grew up in an abusive or chaotic or unpredictable household. Fawn is an attempt to cover up the distress that you feel inside by focusing on your outer environment and specifically managing the emotions of other people. It's kind of like if you're okay, then I can be okay. Fawn is the body's emotional reaction that involves attempts to soothe someone around you instead of resorting to the fight or flight. Okay, let's talk for a really quick second about the difference between your mind and your brain. So the brain is like the physical part. It could be compared to the hardware, the hard drive, the physical computer that you might be listening to this podcast on, or your phone. It's physical. The brain has 100 billion neurons, as we talked about earlier, and it has your higher brain and your lower brain. The mind, however, could be considered your software. That could be considered like your Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, those sorts of things. It's not physical. It's more abstract. So the mind consists of thoughts, emotions, attitudes, and memories. Okay, your brain then is the computer made of gray matter that sits inside your skull, while the mind is the abstract operating system that runs on top of the brain inside your skull. So given that the human brain is made up of about 100 billion neurons that talk to each other using electrical and chemical signals called neurotransmitters, and that the brain is kind of like a really massive tree with lots of branches, what does it look like? Now that we've established like what the brain and all the neurons look like, what does it look like when the neurons actually connect and communicate with each other? Well, that place where the neurons connect and communicate with each other are called synapses. And so they don't actually touch, but it's almost like electricity passes between them. And you might have heard people talk about this. Neurons that fire together wire together. So starting in the womb, when the brain is developing, our brains are creating neural networks that serve as a record for like every experience that we have, and then we assign meaning to them. And this is how memories are formed. So if you could actually go to YouTube and Google neural connections, how thoughts work. And they actually have a video of what a neural synapse looks like when you're creating thought patterns. It's really beautiful, actually, because it looks like they're embracing, even though they don't actually touch. So to wrap up, what does the central nervous system and the brain have to do with your ability to dream? So to achieve the life that you want, you have to tap into the full power of your brain and all of its different neural pathways. So if you open your mind and work with your mind, you can change your life. But if you are stuck in the patterns of fight, flight, freeze, that is really, really challenging to do because your body is thinking about survival. That's all it can think about is survival. Like, how do I just get through a day? How do I just get through like the next hour? I wanted to leave you with some resources that I found really helpful. There are 4 physicians with international audiences and very well-established bodies of work in the area of trauma healing and regulating the central nervous system. I love all of these people. I listen to a lot of their interviews on podcasts, and anytime they come out with something new, I'm always really curious to know like what they've learned and what they're talking about. So the first one is Dr. Peter Levine. He developed a healing modality called somatic experiencing. And he wrote a book that I read many years ago called Waking the Tiger. That book explains what trauma is and how trauma can be stored in your body. It's a brilliant book. I highly recommend it. Another doctor is Amy Apigian, Aimieapigian. She created a program called Trauma Healing Accelerated. Now, she was an MD for many years and then discovered that her true calling was to help people overcome the traumas that they had experienced in life and heal their central nervous systems. Dr. Gabor Mate, I love this man so much. He's such a kind and gentle soul. He's a world-renowned trauma expert and the author of When the Body Says No and many other books. He's got a website with tons of information, and he's done many interviews on podcasts as well. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, he wrote The Body Keeps the Score. I did not read this book. He is very, very technical and dives deep into what happens to the body when you've experienced trauma and that trauma is not resolved. It's a brilliant book. I highly recommend it. It's not one that I have read, however. And then the last resource that I wanted to mention is she is not a doctor, but she has studied extensively under Dr. Peter Levine and some of his proteges. Her name is Irene Lyon, and she has 2 programs on her website. I did her day nervous system tune-up, which I think is brilliant. It's a way to dip your toe in the water and become familiar with her work. And you get to learn a lot about your body and your brain and your central nervous system in that class, as well as some really practical exercises that you can do to restore a state of calm. She takes the 21-day nervous system tune-up much, much deeper in her program called Smart Body, Smart Mind, which is a 12-week program, which is only offered like once or twice a year. And that you get a lot of live interaction with her and people on her team. So all of these folks have, like I said, tons of interviews on podcasts and radio shows that you can listen to for free, as well as books. And in many cases, they all have websites where you can dive deeper. And a lot of them have programs that you can do. There you have it, beloved. That's a deep dive in 30 minutes or less on what your central nervous system is and how it affects your ability to dream what you most want to be, do, and have in your life right now. Thank you so much for listening. I'm so glad you're here. I know this episode was super technical, so I appreciate you being here and sticking with me. Life can get busy and life can get stressful, so your time means a lot. If you are enjoying this show, please leave a rating and review because that is what will help other people find the Dream Lab podcast. If there is someone that you think could benefit from this particular episode, please consider sharing it. You can text them a link or you can post it to your Instagram or Facebook or TikTok or what have you. Until next time, bye for now.